Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for being with us. My name is Rochelle Scouten. I'm Development Director at the National Bicycle Dealers Association. And we are here with our third part in our 2020 U.S. Bicycle Market Report series. And we are happy to once again have Jay Townley with us from Human Powered Solutions to help us with this presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to let you take it away, Jay. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Rochelle. And good day to all of you. It's 12 noon in the central time zone where I live. And I'm sure and hope we have participants from the West and from the mountain states and from the East. But it's a great day here in Wisconsin. Sun is out. It's moving toward the 80s. We had a wonderful 4th of July weekend. I hope all of you enjoyed your weekend as well. As those of you that have been in these webinars before know, I'm going to stop the video because from my standpoint, I think it's a distraction for you. And I'll come back on when we get to the Q&A session. And I am hoping that some of you will have questions for us. But if for any reason you've got a question that you think of and you send it to Rochelle after we're through with the webinar, she forwards them to me. I'll make every effort to give you a full response, to answer in detail. And even if it's a couple of days after, feel free. I'm available to make sure I answer your questions as they become available. I also will put my contact information at the end on the last slide. So if you wish to email me, you certainly can do that as well. So from the standpoint of who I represent, some of you know that I'm the resident futurist at Human Powered Solutions. We're the folks that the NBDA works with and contracted with to do their annual market overview report for 2020, which is the subject of this particular webinar. And I've been honored by the NBDA to do this particular report for the last 21 years. So certainly a little consistency built into both the data and the presentation. What we're doing today is presenting what direct effect retail sales means to bike shops' profitability. And I realize that's kind of a highfalutin title. Excuse me. Kind of a highfalutin title, but this, in fact, is one of the chapters from the overview report. And what we're going to do is take a factual look at retail sales of bicycles, e-bikes, used bikes, which are overlooked by most other folks that are reporting on the industry, on accessories, parts, and service in the United States in the year 2020. And then we're going to look at history, going back for 21 years. What we want to do is focus on what bike shops can take away and use to improve profitability and grow their locally owned businesses. And I realize the connection will be, as we go through this webinar, I'll try to make it as direct as I can. If it's at all fuzzy, let me know. What we're talking about here is key performance indicators across a whole industry, all the way down to what you can do in your bike shop, from your bike shop financials. Just as importantly, I do believe, is giving serious consideration as a specialty bike retailer in joining an NBDA P2 group. They're sometimes known as 20 groups in the automobile industry, also as 20 groups in the motorcycle industry, where the idea of getting up to 20 retailers from geographically dispersed areas to share financial data on a monthly basis and then be able to talk to each other about store operations and do this legally under the antitrust laws of the United States is extremely important and extremely powerful. And I do urge you to look at that as a way of enhancing your business. Talking to Heather this morning, she told me that the cost of the P2 groups, the NBDA has now allowed membership so that you can pay costs on a monthly basis. So you don't have to do everything. You don't have to pay a yearly fee. You can pay a monthly fee, which I think is affordable for every bike shop in this country. Now, this webinar is the third in a series of 8 webinars featuring each of the 16 chapters, as I said, of the NBDA U.S. Bicycle Market Overview 2020 report. It normally takes a couple of minutes for this to catch up. So what I'm trying to do here is toggle over to the agenda. Hopefully this isn't ignoring me. I could prattle on here while I'm trying to get this to change, but the ball's in my court, so I'm going to have to make this work. There we go. Finally, I think technology is a wonderful thing. I'm old enough that this to me is still totally amazing. In any case, for an introduction, we're going to begin with how you can best use the NBDA U.S. Bicycle Market Overview Report, which, by the way, I'm hoping you've just purchased or are considering purchasing, hopefully after you go through this webinar. First, what I would like you to do and what I advise you do is read through the whole report, all 125 pages, by the way. Now, this is going to take you several mornings or evenings, depending on how busy you are at the shop, but there are lots of up-to-date tables, charts, and illustrations for you to go through. This is going to give you an overview of the current U.S. bicycle market and the bicycle business going into this year, 2021. Second, we'd like you to determine which chapters and data sets will be the most helpful for your business and strategic planning. And yes, I'm advising that you write a business plan for your bike shop business. Write it down. Third, carefully reread and study the last 4 chapters and extract the suggested business strategies for your review and consideration that you think are applicable to your specialty bicycle retail business. Every specialty bicycle retail business is different. They're not all exactly the same. It's not a cookie cutter. So look at both the whole report and then specifically these last 4 chapters so that you could take a look at the takeaways that are applicable to your business plan, to the way you're thinking about the future. Now, there are 4 key takeaways from your reading of the NBDA U.S. Bicycle Market Overview 2020 report. And these, we think, are the key things for you to take away from not only this webinar, but the previous webinars, the rest of the webinars we're going to do to finish up this series, and also the report that you'll buy and go through. 1, write down your most important findings from the 2020 report and in this webinar as you see it for your business. And 2, commit to your own business plan, as I said, to writing it down with financial benchmarks and key performance indicators. They're known as KPIs. And if you're not really sure what KPIs are, or which ones you should be looking at from a financial benchmark standpoint, you can ask me, or you can ask any of the NBDA staff, or you could join a P2 group and they'll gladly explain it to you. Third, look up the anniversary date of your NBDA membership and put it on your calendar to make sure you renew your NBDA membership in a timely fashion. And as I've been harping on, join an NBDA P2 group as soon as this webinar is finished. Visit nbda.com and take action to join this Bike Shop Business Intelligence Network. Now, for today's agenda, we're going to start with a definition of direct effect retail sales, followed by a look at the total size of the U.S. bicycle market, less e-bikes, by the way, in retail dollars. And we're going to look at new bicycles, again, less e-bikes. We're going to look at accessories, parts, and service, followed by a 21-year history of retail dollar sales by year from 2020 I'm sorry, from the year 2000 to the year 2020. And that also will be ranked. And the whole US market, because we're going to bring now into the picture e-bikes and used bikes, which are both extremely important segments, so that we can conclude with a complete picture. And then with that done, we're going to look at the future. Now, when we get all through going through the agenda, we also are going to have a question and answer session, which you could take advantage of either on the spot as we wrap this webinar up, or you can contact Rochelle and she'll pass on your questions to me, or you can contact me directly. What is direct effect retail sales? Why are we using this highfalutin term? Well, we got kind of backed into this some years ago when there was a discussion within the bike industry about what are we going to count? And the simple fact is that what we're talking about is the changes in economic activity during the first round of spending. Essentially, it's what consumers spend at retail with you in bike shops or direct sellers. Now, where it becomes important beyond retail is for tourism. For those pieces of the industry that would deal with rental or rental on trails or rental only bike businesses. So for tourism, this involves the impacts on the tourism industry. The direct effect is the first effect during the first round of spending, so that businesses selling directly to tourists are what's involved here. I'm sorry that this turns out to be an economic term, but this is the definition you'll find in the report. And we've used it for probably the bulk of these 21 years because of the industry going off and looking at different ways of measuring the term retail sales. So just to establish what we're talking about in simple terms, despite the definition, despite the highfalutin talk, are dollars spent with you at retail by consumers, the first round of spending in the economic equation. Now, as you would expect, this section is full of tables and charts. And some of these are my favorites, but we're going to start with table 12, which you can find on page 37 of the NBDA U.S. Bicycle Market Overview 2020 report. And it shows estimated direct effect retail sales of new bicycles. And I note here that this does not include e-bikes, but it does include accessories, parts, service, and then a total. And here we're showing the years 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020, with the differences or variances between 2020 and 2019 called out. So let's take a look at the chart. And by the way, one of the reasons that e-bikes are not included in this first round of data is that e-bikes were not included, I think pre-2019, but at least certainly not in 2017. And so what we want to do as we take a look going out into 21 years of comparable data is keep the data presentation so you're looking at apples to apples. In other words, bicycles, parts, accessories, service, those things that were tracked over that 21-year period, so that the trends are the easier to ascertain. And then we look at e-bikes and used bicycles from the time we started to see tracking of those two very important components. And so we treat those two separately, although we do treat them, as I said, at the end of the presentation. So over this 4 years, new bicycles, it's 3.2 billion back in 2017, 3.224 billion. 2018 at 3.2 billion, 2019 at 3.4 billion, 2020 at 3.9, almost 4 billion. Between 2019 and 2020, we see new bicycles, less e-bikes, that were an increase of almost $500 million, $499 million, or about 15% year over year. Now, you'll see that our number that we've developed here is lower from the standpoint of the projections that some others in the industry have been using. The 2020 in some of the reports is more aggressive, is a bigger year than you see here, pushing over 4 billion. I think there's some estimates to even have it at 5 billion just for bikes. What we've done is try to look at the available bicycles in the market and derived our numbers looking at the higher numbers, which quite frankly, we don't think there are enough bicycles in the market to support those kind of numbers, to what we think was the reality of the availability of bicycles to be sold, new bicycles to be sold in the market, and numbers that are much closer to that reality at about a 15% increase in new bicycle sales. Again, less e-bikes. Accessories show growth from 1.1 billion, 144 million, or 1.1 billion, 1.1 again in 2018, slightly lower. 2019, 1.58, 1 billion, 158 million. 2020, a 16% increase at 1.3, almost 1.4 billion, an increase of $185 million. Parts, again, I realize some of you have had trouble getting accessories and parts. The sales here show an 18% increase starting in 2017 at 844 million. 2018, slightly lower at 826 million. 2019, back up again at 846 million. 2020, almost $1 billion alone in parts at 998 million, an increase of $152 million for year over year, 18%. Service, you guys all know that you were inundated with requests. Some folks told me that they couldn't put the phone down or had to have somebody on the phone all the time because of people calling for service, which also accounts for where some of the parts went. Service shows an increase from 2017 at 366 million. We skip all the way over to the 2020 at 427 million, an increase of 66 million over 2019's 360 million. Again, percentage-wise, year over year, 2020 over 2019, about 18% increase. So the total for these four important categories, or for the market, less e-bikes, less used bikes, at 5,600 million in 2017, a 5.5 billion, 5,500 million, 543 million exactly to in 2018. 2019 at 5 billion, almost 800 million, 5.8. 2020 jumps up to a total of 6 billion, 700 million for the total of the U.S. bicycle business, a variance of $915 million, almost $1 billion increase, or 16% year over year, 2020 compared to 2019. A great year. Wonderful. We've called this a sales surge. I won't get into the discussion of whether it was a boom or not. We don't think it was. But again, the numbers here are based on both looking at the available bicycle inventory to sell in new bicycles, and then in turn, we feel that some of these categories were both overstated in some of the general numbers out in the marketplace, some were understated. So we've tried to adjust for a closer reality. Now, keeping in mind, this is one tracking without the important e-bike and used bike categories, but gives you an idea of market size. How would I relate this to a bike shop? How does this relate at all to your business? Well, you go back to your KPIs for your individual bike shop and take a look at what is the percentage of gross revenue of your new bicycles. I would suggest a separate category, which we'll show you as we get into the presentation or toward the end of it, for e-bikes and used bikes. What's the percentage of your gross revenue represented by accessory sales? What is the percentage by parts? What percentage by service? So that you could look at those percentages year over year, and you can compare them going back, so you could see what segments are growing or not growing, what segments are representative, how they look nationally. More importantly, if you're a member of a P2 group, you can compare all those KPIs in gross revenue with other bike shops that are in your P2 group, so you get a feel for how you're doing relative to similar retail operations. Now, this is table 13, and obviously I love tables and charts. You may not like them as much as I do, but table 13 can be found on page 38 of the 2020 NBDA Market Overview Report, and it shows estimated total direct effect retail dollars for the past 9 years. Now we expand out. It goes from 2012 to 2020 and relates to the total, the bottom line we showed you in the previous chart, our previous table. Now, we just reviewed the detail for 4 of those years, so you know what the components are. And 2020, again, is clearly the largest year for the American bicycle business in terms of retail dollars over the last 9 years. It's a very substantial 16% increase over 2019, as we explained earlier. But if we look back historically, the total for the bike world, now this is inclusive of all channels of trade, and does probably the poorest job of capturing direct, though it is a component of this number, in that we just don't have the visibility or haven't had the visibility in direct we should have had. But it is an honest attempt to estimate the direct along with all of the brick and mortar and all of the omni-channel variations within the channels of trade. So from 2012, where the total market was 6 billion or 6.1 billion, compared to 2020 at 6.7 billion, that's part of what we looked at when we said, let's not get to the point where we're talking this a bike boom. It's certainly a surge, a dramatic increase in sales over the previous 2 years. But if you look back historically, 2020 was a lot closer to 2012, or 2012 was a lot closer to 2020 than 2019 was, which had its own issues relative to the market. As you can see, we had some down years. 2013 was off by 278 million, 4.5% down over 2012. 2016, again, another slightly down year. It was a fraction of a percent at 484 million over 2015. 2017 down 122 million over 2016. Again, a fractional reduction, as was 2018 down 35 million, not a lot, over 2017. And then we had an uptick in 2019 at 250 million increase over 2018. And then finally 2020 at 6 billion 700 million, the best year relative to this 9-year period that we're looking at. Again, realizing that if you go back and look at the trend, look at the previous years, while 2020 was really, really great, there were years like 2012 that were also, and 2014, I might add, that were also good high from the standpoint of the total sales of the industry. Now, table 14. This one's going to be a little harder to read, but I couldn't figure out a way in one chart to get all 21 years out of this table. So I think this will be legible enough for what we're doing here. You could also go in and increase the size of this if you need to look at it in more detail. And it can be found on page 39 of the NBDA U.S. Bicycle Market Overview Report 2020. And this shows the whole 21-year history of estimated direct effect retail dollars ranked by total. Now here again, 2020 stands out. It's the number one, or the best year in terms of total retail dollars over the last 2 decades. But what this also shows is, in a ranked form, how other years stood against this best year ever in 2020 at 6 billion 700 million. I mentioned 2016 already, 2015, 2005, 2014, 2012, all come close, and all are 6.1 to almost 6.2 billion against a 6.7 billion year. So that means the bulk of the 20 years or 21 years prior were below the 6 billion mark, or I'm sorry, the 6.1 or 6.2 billion, you have another set of years from 2017 to 2011, or just those 2 years at 6 billion, then it drops below 6 billion for 2008, 2010, 2017, and so on down through 2001. So there's been growth, but there's also been fluctuation and ups and downs. And again, part of what we are looking at from the standpoint of how you relate this to your business is if you're one of the fortunate specialty bike retailers that had a huge year in 2020 and have your cash rich, you got money you're taking to the bank. It's sitting down and determining what your plan is for the future, getting some intelligence and input from about the market for 2021, 2022, going on into the next 3 to 5 years. And before you go out and buy that new car, to think very seriously about what you're going to do to either reinvest in or capitalize your business, or put cash aside so you have a cash reserve in the business. So I guess the idea of making sure that you're looking at the history of your business alongside the history of the industry, and do this same thing. If you've got the data available, rank the gross revenue of your business by year, and then take a look at what occurred in those years and what drove the increase that you got in hand. And then, to the extent that you can, begin to look at the future, which we'll discuss as we get to that point. Now we're going to switch over to charts. I like charts. Hope you do too. This is chart I. You're going to find this on page 40 of the 2020 NBDA Market Overview Report. Now, this is basically the same data as the previous table, but in this case, we've got it in sequential order from 2000 to the year 2020. And you can see graphically how the market, the total size of the market in direct effect dollars, shows the increase both at the far right in 2020, which is nice. It's ticking up toward that very high 6.6 billion, 700 million, ticking up towards 7 billion. But you could see the pattern that the industry went down and up, it ebbed and flowed, but was basically flat until we got to 2020. So part of the issue for the industry and part of the issue for your business is how do we maintain that uptick or something close to it, and don't drop into this back into this pattern of a flat market with what I used to refer to as little or no growth. Now here's chart J. And this is the same as chart I, the previous chart, except we've added a trend line, which is something we also advise you do with your financials, with a number of your KPIs, not just the gross revenue, but the net pre-tax revenue, what you earned, and with that being your profitability, and also take a look at all the key expense areas. So you have an idea of what grew, what ate away your profitability, how your profitability held up, and in turn, how you use that profitability to nurture yourself, your family, and your business. Now, this chart is also on page 40 with chart I. And what we're able to do with this trend line, which is pushed out to the year 2025, 5 years, is to get a feel, at least from a macro standpoint, as to what the future holds. And while this isn't a dramatic increase like that 2019 to 2020 uptick, it is a positive trend line. It is going up. So it's got the potential to go up even further. One of the news articles this morning that I found fascinating is that Amazon, while they're not the biggest retailer in the United States, and it's a love and hate relationship, certainly, with Amazon, Amazon is getting its people back to work. So where it's got offices, it's asking folks to come back to the office space and work in the office space. But it also announced today that it's giving special incentives for anybody that rides a bike to work. It's giving incentives if you ride your own bike. It's giving incentives if you store that bike in the bike parking areas provided by Amazon. It's giving incentives if you use a rideshare bike to get to work and to get back home. It's giving incentives if you lease a bike. And leasing is also in the bike rental category, another category of growth that bike shops should be looking at, as we discussed in our last webinar. So it could be an additional revenue source. That is doing your own form of ride share as a bicycle, either single store or multi-store, and certainly looking at lease programs, because many things have changed in the way that individually owned bikes will not only be purchased, but used in the marketplace. But the good news here is a trend light out to 2025 is not down. While it doesn't look like it's inclining, it's inclined, it's going up dramatically. It certainly, to me, doesn't look like it's going down, and it may not be absolutely flat. It shows potential. It shows that there's room for growth. It shows that you can grow your business under the umbrella of the overall market. Now, here's my favorite table of all the tables at 125 pages. This is table 15. You can find it on page 41 of the NBDA U.S. Bicycle Market Overview 2020 report. It adds estimated e-bike sales and used bike sales to the previous table we showed you, or the estimated direct effect retail dollars. And so it gives what we think is a more complete picture of the market. Now, we don't go back. We've got data for e-bikes and used bikes that goes past 2017, but we can't go back 20 years to do a comparison. We actually could go back probably 8 years. But this gives you a good idea of the importance of adding these in from the bike shop channel of trade standpoint. First of all, e-bikes, extremely important category for the future. We think that e-bikes is the most important growth category for the American bicycle business and specialty retailers or bike shops going forward. Back in 2017, we estimate that e-bikes accounted for $517 million in sales to the overall bike business. That grew in 2020 to $860 million, almost $1 billion. An increase year over year, 2020 over 2019 of 296, almost $300 million, or 53%. Now we put it in green so it stands out, because the total above it and all of the line items above it, from new bicycles, accessories, parts, service, total, are all the same as that very first table I showed you. So now we're adding e-bikes. Now, the national figures shown for e-bikes are below this. We feel that they're understated. We mentioned this in the overview report. What we've done is we've relied on Ed Benjamin and LEVA, the Light Electric Vehicle Association, to provide their estimates of e-bike sales in America, which we have used in our reports for the last 3 years, which we deem to be and feel are more representative and accurate. But they are also, at this point, higher than many of the estimates that you've seen in the press, in the trade press, in some of the press releases that have been out there over the course of 2020 going into 2021. And we do think that looking at the meticulous work that Ed Benjamin has done, that this is a better representation of the reality of retail sales of e-bikes. Again, we repeat, this is the most important category for the future. There's a great deal of work that needs to be done relative to e-bikes. This is not a shoe-in from the standpoint of either the regulatory environment or the safety environment. You might recall that Human Powered Solutions put out in the last month a set of protocols for the safe storage and charging of lithium-ion batteries for e-bikes. We believe that that and the recycling of lithium-ion batteries will become an issue that the industry is going to have to deal with and work through, and especially bike retailers are going to have to be particularly attentive to, that this will be a whole new technical aspect as well as an insurance and a safety aspect for especially bike retailers who are the primary retailers of e-bikes, but that there is a bright future because you've got companies like Amazon that are not only giving incentives to employees that ride bicycles to work. By the way, they'll give incentives if you walk to work too, but they not only give incentives for riding a bicycle to work, but they're including e-bikes, making sure it's very clear that the incentives to ride a bicycle to work includes bicycles and e-bikes. We've also added in blue used bicycles, which we started to track in 2012. And unfortunately, the funding sources went away about 2014. So only got 2 to 3 years of actually being able to go out and do consumer surveys where we picked up and recorded accurate sales and purchases of used bicycles and were able to include them in the data. But we, from everything that we've been able to track, used bicycles have been an important component. Used bicycles were an extremely important component to the specialty bicycle retail trade. If anybody out there doubts that used bikes are an important category, just take a look at the Pros Closet as a business and how their net value has changed, increased, what kind of volumes they're doing, and the amount of venture capital they have attracted. In short, we think used bikes contributed $1,200,000 back in 2017, slowly grew to 2020 at $1,680,000,000, almost $1.7 billion in retail sales. Great deal of that went through specialty bicycle retailers. A variance or increase of $430 million or 34%. We think we haven't captured all of this because, again, we haven't had the consumer research, but that is about to change. And so this is an important component that we feel confident we have a conservative look at. Those of you in specialty bike retail know that used bikes were an important component during the shortage of new bicycles in 2020. For many of you, it became an important component. So the grand totals that we started to report back in 2012, 2013, 2014, for 2017, you add up all of the pieces of business and you see $7,300,000,000, 2018, $7 billion, almost $400 million, 2019, 7.6, 2020, $9,249,000,000, or a variance increase 2020 over 2019 of $1,641,000,000 or 22%. Now, we think that's pretty close to what the reality was. And so e-bikes, we've, in the last two lines in this chart, we show as a percentage of the total to give you an idea of the importance. And e-bikes at 2020, fewer 9% market share of total, which includes the grand total of used bikes, e-bikes, everything else in the industry. Up from 7%. 2018 was also about 9%, but a lower number. So it's comparative. And we think that you're going to see used bikes as a growth area because the circular economy, which we have not gone into detail, but we'll talk more about in the future. The circular economy, the sales of used clothing, previously owned cars, previously owned bicycles, and now we get to previously owned e-bikes, along with the recycling issues relative to lithium-ion batteries and the recharging issues, all become extremely important to how we integrate those into the channel of trade, into your business planning, into your ability of your specialty bicycle retailer to make money going forward. So we think that table 15 is an extremely important table for you to look at, to also pull out and look at how you could do your own individual specialty bicycle retail business comparisons look at these components. If you're not doing used bikes now, think about how they would fit and how you can make them work for you in your community and in your neighborhood, and also the important bike category, and making sure that you're working with the NBDA relative to the best possible representation of not only the product, but also the training and education of your technical staff and your service staff, and also the integration of e-bikes as an important category, and all the things that have to be learned in advance about them into the P2 groups, as well as your general networking of bike shops in your community. So let's take a brief look at the future. We've said this before, but we want you to really focus on the fact that the great tragedy of the COVID-19, and it was a huge tragedy for the world and for this country, that tragedy created an opportunity. And that part of that opportunity is what we've referred to as the Bicycling Relevance Index. The perception that bicycles and bicycling are viable solutions. Now, that isn't to say that a lot of time and effort was expended by the industry and its associations in the advocacy of bicycles and bicycling. But the black swan economic event, the public health crisis of COVID-19 and the pandemic have accomplished in 6 to 8 months what the bicycle business has labored at for 46 years, since the end of the last bike boom, to make bicycles and bicycling a viable solution in the eyes of the American consuming public. That's what we call the Bicycling Relevance Index. That's what we say is one of the great benefits coming out of this great tragedy. And one of the proofs of that is what our friends at Amazon just announced. I don't know if they're our friends or not, but what Amazon just announced, and that is that here's one of the major corporations and employers in the United States that is now offering incentives for their employees to ride bicycles and e-bikes to the offices of that corporation. Now, in addition to that, there's some very favorable legislation that just passed through committee in the House of Representatives that has come into and through the committee in the Senate that will be extremely beneficial and add to what Amazon did relative to the promotion of bicycles and bicycling, or the Bicycling Relevance Index. Now, equally important for you to understand is something we've talked about in every one of our webinars. 2020 was an inflection point. It was an inflection year, as the economists talk about it. From an economic standpoint, the surge in retail dollars that many of you experienced, the surge in revenue, was an added bonus. As we come out of the pandemic, we go to the post-pandemic period, the end of 2021, going into 2022, will be for bike shops and for the whole of the bicycle industry, either very, very bad or very, very good. That's what an inflection point is. When you have an inflection point year, the following years economically are either better or worse. We think they're going to be much better because of the Bicycling Relevance Index, because of things like Amazon, who just, again, their announcement, because of the support of the Congress for all things electric propulsion or non-internal combustion propulsion. So the added bonus, the retail dollars and the revenue at this point have to be looked at very carefully from the standpoint of how they're employed. A good dealer friend of mine that Heather put me in contact with that I hadn't talked to in years out on the East Coast said in the conversation we had when we were talking about the bike business in the future, that he advises dealers not to go out and buy that new car yet. If you got a bunch of cash that you're sitting on, take out a savings account. Think about how you're going to capitalize your business. Use that cash to improve your business. Pay off some of the debt. and in turn invest in the future, because the future is going to be different. Even if it's better, it's going to be different. And it's going to be the job of the American bicycle business and especially bicycle retailers in their neighborhoods to make the perception the reality of the future. So in summary, we've looked at direct effect retail sales and hopefully defined it, taken the mystery out of it, or either that made it more of a mystery, I hope not. But retail sales, our direct effect retail sales, are consumer dollars spent with you as a retailer. We've looked at the total size of the U.S. bicycle market in retail dollars. We've looked at it from different angles and different perspectives. We've looked at new bicycles, less e-bikes, and accessories, parts, service. We've looked at retail dollar sales by year from 2020 through 2000. I made that mistake before. From 2000 to 2020, over 21 years, ranked by dollar volume. And we've looked at the whole market. We brought it all back together, put it together, and showed you e-bikes and used bikes included. And we've looked at how that fits into the future and hopefully tied it back to your individual specialty bicycle retail business plan and your strategic plan for the future. So with that, hopefully we've got some questions out there, Rochelle.
Yes, we do.
Hooray! First time in 3 webinars.
All right, let's go into the first one. Jay, would it be useful to look at unit sales trend versus dollars since average bike price has increased over the period being compared?
Absolutely. We are advocates of looking at both, but we do feel that you start with units, that's the first important measure. We focused on dollars here because that's the way we shaped it in the market overview report. But you might recall that the first 3 chapters we went into were all based on units. And the chapters after this will mostly be based on units. So yes, absolutely. Units become an extremely important metric. And in turn, the merchandising of units by price point becomes a very important metric. So the answer to that question is yes, absolutely.
All right. Are we, the IBD, the primary source for e-bikes, or will we trend closer or farther away?
Well, right now, if you take a look at a piece that Rick Vosper published, I think a week and a half ago in Brain, his data working through the stats shows that bike shops are the primary retailers of e-bikes in the United States. Last night, our group met, the Human Powered Solutions group, met with a client, and we looked at some of the data for the brands. And there are some brands that, again, dealers are aware of. Rad is an example. Saunders. There are some direct selling brands that have been doing really well in the market, have large numbers. But right now, especially bike retailers are the primary retailers of e-bikes. They have that position for a number of reasons. Part of it is knowledgeable staff. I think a big part of it is also the overall comfort that consumers get from out of the reliability, the warranties, and the brand name connection to the brands that are sold. As to the second part of the question, I hope that dealers stay the primary source of e-bikes, and that was part of my comment about there's really work to be done. There are many open-ended questions that need to be answered and addressed relative to regulation. As an example, there is a UL, an underwriter's lab, voluntary third-party certification standard that the bicycle industry was a part of, that they helped the and there's a webinar that was done in the early part of 2020 on the subject of I think it's Underwriter Lab 2842 is the standard, UL 2842. That is a complete self-certification. It's not mandatory, but it's a standard that needs to be looked at because it's not being readily adopted or used by the industry. It's not something that dealers are being advised to make the product is certified. There's a self-certification from the brand. That eventually is going to get into the insurance world. We're aware of it now because we're investigating it. But the other part of that equation or discussion will be two parts, actually. One is the safe storage, charging, maintenance of lithium-ion batteries until such time as there are solid state lithium-ion batteries available. Basically, what I'm saying is that there are folks that make cells for lithium-ion batteries that are at the very top of the trade. They are the brands that dealers should be making sure they're asking, are the e-bikes that we're selling, do they have batteries that do have these cells from these sources? And that in turn, I can give you basic rules. A dealer should never charge lithium-ion batteries overnight unattended. And every dealership should have a fire-resistant cabinet to store lithium-ion batteries in when that shop is closed and unattended. And so there are some things that need to be done at the retail level that will be very important to the future, and then along with educating the consumer about what do they do relative to these issues in home. So it's a long way around saying that I think bike shops are the only ones that can do these things to be the information source and connection to the retailer. But I do think the retailers need education. I think the NBDA is going to set down the road of being that educator along with some of the other folks in the trade. But there's a job to do here to make sure that the specialty bike retailer can hold on to and be that preferred source for e-bikes in the future.
Thank you.
Sorry for going on a rant.
Looks like we have one last question. Hi, Jay. Are these numbers adjusted for the tariffs on Chinese goods?
No, you don't have to adjust. These are real numbers. So in other words, all data that we use starts with imports. And imports of regular bikes include bicycles from China. So that includes the bikes that are tariffed with the punitive tariffs as well as the regular tariffs. So they're real. They're based on real numbers. The real numbers that are derivatives, our starting numbers are the imports that are all in the report, the 125 pages. And then we build from there. So yes, it takes that into account. And from the standpoint of e-bikes, Ed Benjamin's numbers are painstakingly derived, because I will tell you, I share Ed's absolute wonderment at how the U.S. Customs Services has screwed up the HTS numbers associated with e-bikes to make it extremely difficult to track e-bikes coming into the country. But Ed's numbers are based on an excruciating, detailed examination of HTS, harmonized tariff schedule numbers, to try to pick out and make sure he identifies the direct sellers to consumers from China and those that are imported in quantity, as well as individual shipments, and be able to total them all up and come up with the best possible estimate of e-bike sales in the United States. So that's a long way around saying, yeah, the tariffs are a component that either affect or don't affect the number we use, which is the import number.
Perfect. All right, that is all the questions we had submitted here. If anybody else, either watching the recording or later, thinks of a question, you can email them to info@nbda.com and we'll forward them on to Jay and get you your answers. Or you can email Jay directly, right?
Yes, you can email me at jay@humanpoweredsolutions.com.
Great.
So it's jay@humanpoweredsolutions.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning, Jay. We really appreciate all the great information and statistics that you're sharing. So thanks once again, and we'll be back here in 2 weeks.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. Thank you, Rochelle. And thank the audience for the questions. It was delightful to be able to answer questions live, upfront, personal after the webinar.
All right. Thanks again.
Take care. Thank you.